Okay, welcome to everybody, and especially to Martin and Alison. Of course, they're doing the talk. Over the years, Martin's done lots of talks for us at Travel Talk in his role as working for Christian Aid, and it's really lovely to have him back again, and especially, of course, Ali. And I know we've talked about over the years about what you might do, and this one, I'm really glad we've got there in the end. This one, it sounds like it's going to be really good. So,
I hope so.
If you're all sitting comfortably, then I guess we begin. Over to you, Ali and Martin.
Right, well, Martin will start.
Okay.
Of course. Hello there, everybody. It's good to be with you this morning. Welcome to our home. It's nice to see yours. But we want to share with you a very special trip that we took last September and October. This trip started where all good trips start, Leicester railway station. And Alison was there slightly longer, I think, then. And we're off to Canada. Alison had been born in Canada, left when she was almost 18 months, and this was her first time back. So how did it feel sitting on the station?
Unbelievable, really. I'd spent so long over the years thinking maybe
Sorry, Alt.
there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, so to actually find myself at the start of a journey to a place that I've talked about revisiting for so long was just beyond me, really.
Yeah. So what we did, we flew. So we not on the trip. We went up to London, Heathrow, flew to Montreal. From Montreal, so this is Canada, if you can recognise it. We flew via Toronto to a place called Sault Ste. Marie, and then from Sault Ste. Marie up to Wawa, which was her hometown. So that's what we were searching for. We were searching for Wawa and the settlement outside of Wawa where she was born. So really, this journey started on the 18th of May, 1960. Those of you who can work it out, of course, Alison is 60 on next Monday. But there she is, born in Canada in 1960. And this is how her mother and Alison got to the maternity hospital. This is at Snowcat.
Yeah, it's called a snowcat, and apparently, so I was born in the middle of May, and apparently there was still so much snow on the ground that they had to get my mum to the hospital in the snowcat, and because of the risk of getting stuck in drifts, the doctor actually arranged to meet her halfway in case she got stuck. So that was how much snow there was.
Yeah. But then really the story started earlier, back in April 1953, when Alison's parents, Les and Helen, and her then very little brother, I think 6 years old, decided to emigrate to Canada. So they caught this ship, the Georgic, and a couple of shots there, that's Les and Andrew, a couple of times there on the boat, arriving in Canada and making their way to Wawa and being housed in a temporary accommodation at a place called Low Falls. That's Helen with little Andrew, and then eventually moving to the High Falls power station area, living in this big house. They did come back, they were there for 4 years, came back for a year, remembered why it was they'd gone to Canada, to get away from the conditions in post-war UK. So they went back to Canada for a second stint, and there they lived in a one-story house at High Falls, and this was the house that you were born and brought up in?
Yeah, so my dad actually went over there to work for Great Lakes Power Company, which is a hydroelectric plant, and that was what he'd gone over there to do. Yeah, So there is the actual power station. Dad had written on the back how many steps there were, how much hard work it was, but that was the power station that he worked at.
Capturing the power of the, now I have trouble saying this, Mishpicotton River. Yeah, so the tidal wave and so on, capturing it for hydroelectricity.
Just the water.
Just the waterfalls. Yeah. Okay. I don't like to get too technical because I don't understand. This is Andrew standing with his toboggan on the bridge across the river at the hydro plant.
So the beneath him is actually the dam that's contained in the river, and they're drawing the power from it. So he's standing on this wooden bridge over the dam, yeah, with the river, the low side, to the left would have been the high side of the dam. Behind him is the two-story building they lived in then, and the single story on the left was the house they lived in the second time, which was when I was born.
Yeah. And they can have picnics on the ice.
Yeah, the ice got so thick that you could drive over it, you could have picnics on it, which included having a bonfire. Well, not maybe a bonfire, but a picnic fire. And my brother had actually, on the left there, he'd apparently just fallen in, decided to paddle in the fish holes and fallen in. So he was now only half dressed because he got so wet.
And this is him with his dad, Les, out and about in the snow. But they can also travel in this car. If Andrew were here, he would tell you every detail.
He knew how to recognize, because the car models designs changed every year. He knew how to recognize not just the make of car, but the year from looking at the hubcaps.
Yeah, amazing. Or here's another way to travel, and this is how they got there on the first.
I think
trip,
this would have been how they got there on the first trip. There was definitely a flight in a bush plane, which would probably have flown from an area. This is actually called Sioux. The plane is called Sioux something or other. Sioux, I don't know, Airways or something. But it would have flown from Sault Ste. Marie. And during the flight, apparently it only had room for 2 passengers. So with my mum, dad, and my brother, they actually had 3 passengers. So my brother spent the flight sitting on a suitcase by the door. During the flight, the door came open on its latch. It was still latched, but open, rattling around. And so when my mum and dad, when they landed, they pointed out to the pilot that the door had come loose, and the pilot just said, "Oh yeah, it's always doing that."
So yeah, but they got there safely, so that's good. And well, Alison grew up with Canada.
That is me. That is me.
You, isn't it? Yeah.
Do you like the cheeks?
So, but when you were, well, it was September, wasn't it? So when you were about 16 months old,
Yeah.
the family decided to come back to the UK, and they didn't go back again. So he came back on the ship called the Corinthia, sailing from Montreal to Liverpool. Here's an abstract of the log for the ship. And as you can see down here, the passage took almost 12 minutes short of 5 days. And I think you were walking around the ship most of the time.
My poor mum and dad, they hadn't had the money to travel comfortably on all their previous journeys, but they decided they weren't going to do it again. So they would travel first class, and they were really looking forward to this. But I had found my legs, and I just apparently loved walking around the ship. So they just spent the whole journey taking shifts, walking me around the ship. So they never, all 3 of them, sat down to a meal at the same time.
Oh dear. So they came back. So we were following in their footsteps. And say it's the first time Alison had been back, having been talking about it for most of her life, I guess. And this is Sault Ste. Marie Airport. And we came out of there, and down that end we could pick up a taxi. So we got the taxi, and the taxi driver obviously wanted to know where we were going, but for 2 reasons. Firstly, to get us safely there, and we had an apartment in this building that we got to Airbnb. But the second reason was to make sure we were in the right Sault Ste. Marie. Because as you look across the river, that's Sault Ste. Marie, United States, and we were in Sault Ste. Marie, Canada. We'd landed at the right airport, because there's an airport both sides of the river, and we were staying on the Canadian side. So he was very relieved. But he had passengers who arrived at the Canadian airport, but their accommodation was in the United States. So glad we got over that hurdle. But Sault Ste. Marie was the big city, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the big city. They lived outside of this small settlement called Wawa. They were about 40 minutes drive away from Wawa. They would go there for whatever they could get locally, but if they didn't have it, they would drive to this city, which was probably about 3 hours drive away, and it was it was known as the city. It's still known as the city. It has a population of 73,000, which we reckon is about a quarter of the population of Leicester, but they still refer to it in capital letters, if you like, as the city.
So we got out and about a bit in Sault Ste. Marie. We visited, we walked past every day almost, this bush plane museum, with of course memories of that original trip. But the highlight really was going into the Agua Canyon. You can see Sault Ste. Marie there at the bottom, and the markers are for the railway line that runs into Sault Ste. Marie, into the Agua Canyon. And we were able to board the train that takes the 4-hour journey into the center of the canyon, but it was a very lovely, very pleasant journey, but slow.
It gave you plenty of time to admire the view.
Yes, to get to mile 113 at the in the canyon to the Bridal Veil Falls. So this is just some of the shots on the way. Looks like we're going quite fast here.
Yeah, well, basically, I mean, the train was trundling. It was very long, presumably very heavy. It was a very powerful engine, but it trundled. We were going uphill, and as we're trundling along, there's an announcement saying, for passenger safety, we really don't want you standing between carriages, because the train will reach speeds of up to 40 miles an hour. Which was quite a laugh, really. But this was possibly 40 miles an hour.
Yeah. And quite a misty day as well. But you got some lovely shots of from the train as we.
So we were there in the fall, hoping to find autumn colours, but in Sault Ste. Marie it hadn't reached. It was still green. But as we went higher up and further north, the colours started to change, as you could see from the previous image. And this was actually when we got into Agua Canyon, which, is it time to talk about one train in and one train out a day? Yeah, so basically there was one train in and one train out a day. You had an hour and a half when you got there after a 4-hour journey in and a 4-hour journey back. You had an hour and a half, and if you didn't arrive in time to catch the train back again, you could wander around, you could have picnics, whatever, but you would miss the train, and there was no phone signal, so there really was no choice but to stay there until tomorrow's train turned
I think
up.
we found one little hut you could have
possibly you might have had to break in though.
Yes. So this was Bridal Falls. You took this from the train, I think.
Yeah, as we were arriving in the canyon.
You can see there. And then similar pictures on the way back. But one interesting stop is mile, well, not stop, but the place it passes through is mile 92. And just want to show you a video here, and Alison will tell you a bit about mile 92.
So it was the name mile 92 that sort of came back into my head when we were thinking about going. Mum and Dad used to talk about it a lot. It was one stop along this train route, and apparently, as we can see here, it was actually a power station, a hydroelectric power station. And So they would have had a small settlement there for people to work in the power station, and there was so little happened in that area that the train was the highlight of the day. Apparently, every time the train went through, everybody would come out of their houses just to watch the train go past. So here we are.
Yeah, so we're crossing Montreal River here, and the bridge is made of metal now, but it was originally a wooden bridge. But unfortunately, that wooden bridge caught fire and burnt down some years back, and they rebuilt it with the metal with iron. Yeah, there you go, another technical one. But you can see the colours of the trees. Some are still green. There's a hint of the autumn colour coming up.
Mike, you see the other, you could see the other train.
Yeah, what's happening? That next way.
Plenty of time to get to the fellow.
Yeah. But really, that's a highlight of Sault Ste. Marie. But then we went off to Wawa. We caught the bus up the road to Wawa, and the road runs practically along the side of Lake Superior.
Yeah, we've been told to sit on the way there. We've been told to sit on the left side of the bus, and on the way back on the right side, because that was the way you would get to see all the views. So we did. We were very careful, and it was atrocious weather. It was driving rain. You basically could see maybe 2 yards beyond the bus window. It was awful. So much for the scenic view.
Yes. But we arrived in Wawa. This was taken on another day, but Wawa means wild goose in Ojibwe language. The Ojibwe are the First Nation people who live in this part of Canada and are the original inhabitants. Wawa is a town of about 3,000 people with a history of mining, forestry, and the fur trade dating back to the late 1960s.
No, 1660s.
1660s. Yeah. But Alison is standing here under one of the statues of the wild goose. This was the original one.
This was the original one. So it was built after the Trans-Canada Highway was built, which went past the town. So this is showing you it at the time. The idea was you can just see the highway in the background there. It was to attract people from the highway into the town. They were hoping to pull in the tourist trade. But at the time it was also highly embarrassing. The local people described it as looking very much like an egg-bound goose. They couldn't see how it would ever take off.
So they replaced that with another one, which is now sitting on a cafe restaurant, yeah, which looks fairly closed up at the moment. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so that's the second one sitting on the roof there, and that is now the present one by the highway, which
they are proud of it.
Right.
They are proud of it. To me, I still think they could have done so much better, but never mind.
No, never mind. But Wawa, wild goose. That's the story behind it. We were picked up in the pouring rain, fortunately, by the hosts that we were staying with. This is Rock Island Lodge, which is a few miles outside of Wawa, right on the edge of Lake Superior. And it's the sort of place you'd normally come to if you want to go kayaking or fishing, but we just wanted to enjoy the lake and use it as a base. But it was a lovely place to stay. Very environmentally friendly. I think in the end that's why we chose it, because it was an eco lodge. It was great to be there, but it was so choppy on the day.
Yeah, it was really stormy. It was just get inside and stay sheltered and dry. Eventually it dried up enough for us. It stopped raining enough for us to move out and actually look at the view, but still very stormy. But yeah, you can get an idea.
Yeah. So this is Lake Superior, which is a massive lake, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, to me, because there was such big waves there, it was a constant surprise to me that I was getting splashed with this water, but I wasn't getting sticky. Like with the salt, when you're at the beach and just after you've been there for a while, you just feel sticky. This is fresh water, but it's big enough that it has its own weather system.
and beautiful skies at night.
Yeah, and this is when it's calmed down a bit. And this you can see here is it's an inukshuk, and basically it's to do with being a wayfinder. It's about communicating with people who might be coming along that way. Different thoughts, but as to exactly what it's doing, but it might actually be telling them, for example, what to avoid because it's dangerous territory, or rough territory. The water's dangerous here, good fishing here, that kind of thing. But this one, the theory is that it was actually built by a guest at the lodge, but it's been there for years, so they did a very good job of it.
Yeah, so it's a First Nation tradition. To build those, and there was the.
This is the boy. They spent quite some time actually realizing that this was what they were talking about when they talked about a buoy. Yeah, it's basically marking that it's rocky water here, that it's tricky, but also where we were was on kind of the mouth of two rivers that join together as they join Lake Superior. So you've got the Mishapacotton River and the Magpie River coming together just before they meet the lake, and so it makes for some very choppy water at times. So it's a constant reminder. The room we were in had the light flashing in our room all night.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a calmer moment though.
Yeah, so that was first thing in the morning, and you can see to the left there is where the Mishapacotton and Magpie rivers come into the lake.
Ah, yes, nice, calm time to settle in. And let's see, we arrived on the Friday, and on the Saturday we were being met by a couple of local historians who we'd been in contact in advance to try and help us find the settlement where Alison had lived. So how did you feel that night before they were turning up now?
Well, by this point I was getting increasingly nervous. I think starting from when we were in Sault Ste. Marie, I had begun to realise that actually my mum and dad and brother lived in the middle of nowhere, and what were the chances? I had nobody from the family with me, and my brother had gone back in 2012, and even he wasn't sure. He'd lived there for 8 years of his life, and even he wasn't sure if he found where we used to live. And I was suddenly actually in quite a bit of dread that after all this time we would turn up somewhere in the vicinity of where I live, but actually go home and have no idea really, and just say, well, I was here somewhere. And because I was suddenly realized we're hoping, when my mum and dad lived there, my dad was there working for Great Lakes Power Company at the High Falls Power Plant. The power station is still there, but it's now remotely controlled from several hundred miles away. So they don't need anybody working on site anymore. So the houses have all gone. They went years ago. And so it was, to me, it was just going to be guesswork as to whether we find it. I suddenly realized that power stations, the picture of my brother standing on the bridge with the houses behind him, you probably wouldn't be able to get access to a place like that anymore. There may be security fences, cameras. Suddenly I realized maybe in advance we should have written to them and said, please can we visit? And actually maybe they'd be the people who could point us in the right direction. And so the night before it was just, is this all going to be a fiasco? Just a scary waste of a trip.
Yeah. And all the other people who were staying at the lodge, we told them the story, and they were getting a bit nervous for us too, really. So as we come to the end of this first part, in the second part, we'll address the question: will Alison find her way home? And then go on to Montreal, more surprises there. And then, if there's time, we just want to talk about the impact of the group of 7, and introduce you to somebody called Benjamin Chichi. So I'll stop the presentation there, and we'll have a look and see whether there are any questions that have come up in chat. So if anyone's got any, oh, there's 6 questions. So let's just have a look at that. Alison Emmett, yeah, hello Alison, long time no see. It's helped your fear of flying. Well, good, yeah, because we got that.
Yeah, I don't think my mum ever got over it. One of the obstacles to going back to Canada was actually that she'd sailed with Cunard. She had loved sailing, and she really didn't want to fly. So that was one of the obstacles.
But the last flight, the bit from Toronto, because we're Montreal to Toronto, and then Toronto to Sault Ste. Marie, and that last leg was in the smallest plane I've ever flown in.
Oh, it was cute. It was
really
so cute.
exciting. Yeah.
You suddenly felt like you suddenly felt like you really were on an adventure at this point.
Yeah. So the population of Wawa is 3,000 people. It's maybe beginning to grow a bit more.
It's had some tough times. It's had a variety of mines there. It's had iron ore mines. There have been gold mines there. They're beginning to talk about there may be diamonds in the area, but the mines have closed down and people have gone away and businesses have gone away. And the people who were staying in the lodge with us were saying, "Oh, yeah, big town, Wawa. Oh, going into the high life then, are you?" You know, and it's had some tough times, but they're beginning to be hopeful that things may open up again.
So, they were certainly talking about the gold mines possibly reopening, and the town council have employed a economic development officer. I don't think she's got much to do at the moment because we've looked at the information there, and of course the whole town's in lockdown at the moment. But there was signs that some younger people were moving back because there were possibilities of new jobs and new careers.
Or they were going to create their own possibilities.
Yes. Or there were people who had left Wawa who were now coming back in retirement. I'm not sure if we were tempted or not.
But, I was definitely. But the hardships of winter, it's 6 months of snow. One of the, there's a picture that I looked through of my mum and dad's of the snowbanks alongside the road to the house. And on the back, Dad said we had 9.5 feet of snow last month. And this was happening every month for 6 months, basically. So I don't know if we'd know, coming in from outside, I don't know if we'd have a clue how to survive it. So.
But a lot of the local restaurants and tourist attractions, if you can call them that, motels and stuff, and fishing places, in September they had already closed for the winter.
Yeah.
And we met a lot of people who were going away to their second home, which would be further south, although there was one extreme.
Yeah, there was one guy on this cute little plane. Is that the one you're looking at? Yeah. So our flight out to Sault Ste. Marie, this guy, I don't know, you've got 2 seats together all the way through the plane. And so Martin and I were sat separately. And this guy, I was talking to him, and so are you going home? Is this a business? What are you doing? Oh, he's on his way back to his home. He basically spends 6 months of the year in China. I think he has a wife there, as far as I remember now. But he spends 6 months in China and then spends 6 months in Wawa. And so at the time I commented on, you've chosen an interesting time of year to be going back to Wawa with I think we left in October, sort of coming up to the middle of October, and I think 2 weeks later they'd had snow. So you've chosen an interesting time to turn up. And he said, I think I got the timing wrong this time. So
but if you want to search for it on the internet, Wawa, it's got webcams, and you can click on the webcams. And if you stay long enough, occasionally a car goes by. You might see somebody out for a walk. I mean, it's partly to do with the lockdown, but you do get, yeah,
It's not the busiest of places.
no,
Yeah.
but Friday night at the bowling alley is pizza night, so a lot of excitement around around Friday night. So.
Yeah, so basically, we left the first half with me the day before we were due to go and try and find the place where I'd lived 58 and a half years before, and never been back since. And so that was the Friday. The Saturday came. So for Jill, this is in Canada. My dad worked for Great Lakes Power Company in the middle of nowhere. And after 58 years of talking about it, we finally got to going back. Yeah, the Saturday, our guides, the two local historians we'd been in touch with before we arrived, they were due to come straight after lunch, which left us with the morning to wander around distractedly, take a few trails, maybe just wander around where we were staying. Very nervous and tension building up all the time for when they turned up and what would happen. So we had our lunch, and they turned up not long after, and we sat at the lodge where we were staying with, I got some photos out that I brought with me, and they got some photos out based on the kind of information we'd sent them in advance. And then suddenly, Johanna, who was the daughter of the other host guide, Kyrene, Johanna just suddenly said, right, okay, let's go. Let's see what, let's show you what we found. And so all of a sudden it was there.
Yep.
It was really nervous.
Into the car and on High Falls Road.
Which the power plant my dad worked at was High Falls power plant, and here we were, suddenly on the road to the plant through the bush, which I'd heard so much about through the years, all sorts of stories of adventures and things, and there we were on the road. And I have to say, I've been wondering whether there'd be any, oh yes, this is it, or whether it'd just be, oh, this is pretty, or okay, never mind. But I have to say, it felt like I was coming home. You know, when you've traveled on a journey so many times that even if you're asleep and somebody else is driving, you're in a car, even if you're asleep, your body, your subconscious knows when you're coming home, and you wake up generally 3 corners away from your house. It felt like I was going the right way. It was just this sense of this road feels right. So here we were.
Yeah, because you must have travelled up and down here for
a
lot of the time in your first 16 months of life.
Yeah, and here we were. So this is High Falls Road still, and this is the first site of the Michipicoten River, which was where the dam was, the hydro plant that my dad worked at, and this was the first site. And again, it just felt like home somehow. It just felt right. It was strange how much it did without me thinking about it. It was just right. And this is the dam. This is the river dammed, where the plant is. We got pictures of the settlement. On the way there, we basically, our guides stopped shortly before the river to say, well, there's this area, and we pulled off the road, and I wandered around desperately trying to make it work, desperately trying to make it fit.
There were foundations.
There were foundations of previous houses which had gone, and there was a rose growing in the shrub, in the undergrowth that was coming back. So there have been houses there, but it didn't feel right. And so we got back in the car again, and Johanna said, okay, well, next stop then. And when we got to this point, I just knew that we were nearly there. There's a postcard that my dad had written from when we were living there, or when they were living there, basically. This is the postcard. As you can see, it's very battered. And on the back, Dad's written, basically, if you see this, this is the view we have from our dining room. And so I was then able to fit in my mind that this was right. This, you can see the bend of the river in the old postcard, and you can see the bend of the river in the photograph I took. One of the things that was bothering me about standing where the foundations were previously was that the river was all wrong. From the photo of my brother standing on the bridge, on the left of the bridge was the high water, and on the right of the bridge was the drop where the water came out of the flumes, the tail race, whatever it's called. And so it was lower on the right hand side. And where we were standing, the high water was on the left, but the low water was on the right, which was right for the view of the picture, but it wasn't right for the view of the postcard, which would show the high water on the right and the low water on the left. But we were nearly there. And here we have it. This is the High Falls power plant. It's now called something else because it was rebuilt and renamed after somebody who worked for the Great Lakes Power Company, I think.
We just remind people that when your family lived there, of course, the dam and the power station were staffed. But now it's all run remotely
from hundreds of miles
away.
away.
Hence the houses going. And the houses weren't demolished, they were actually lifted up and taken to auction. And they're dropped elsewhere.
Transplanted somewhere else.
Yeah, but it meant that the houses are now gone because there was nobody needed to live in the area.
But looking at this view, we couldn't quite get straight on in the way that we would have been from the photo with my brother on. But because on the right hand side of this picture, there's trees grown up since, and there's security fencing. But the road would have gone straight down the hill, and you see where the barrage is, the yellow there. That is the route the road would have taken across the river. The dam has been rebuilt slightly further downstream, but the road would have gone across the river there, and basically the settlement that my mum and dad lived in, that I lived in, was on the right of this picture. So you see the bridge here, my brother standing on. You've got the low water on the right, high water on the left. The house they lived in, the first visit, the two-story one, the house that I lived in after I was born. The second visit, the single-story house. And basically that bridge went where that yellow barrage was. So that's where the houses would have been. When you got further around the road, I could just, the lie of the land, you see the houses are raised on a sort of a slope. The lie of the land, it became apparent that behind those yellowish trees was the slope that it would have been on. And you can actually see behind that rise on the black and white photo, there is actually a gorge. Mum used to talk about a gorge behind the house. I couldn't get a perspective on it, but there's some kind of stream running in there. Mum used to talk about thunderstorms, which sounded spectacular as the thunder echoed down the gorge. And yeah, you can just about make it out with the trees there, that's there.
So we didn't seem to be there for very long. We knew we couldn't get any closer, but we were pretty certain, and Johanna and Kyrene agreed with us, that that's where the houses would have been. How did that feel in that very sort of brief moment we were there?
It was a miracle. To me, it was a miracle. After all these years and there being nobody left who could guide me, who had been there, it was very clearly where it had been. It was just amazing, and it happened after all these years. It happened so quickly and so simply, and yes, there we are, and no fuss, no fanfare. It's here.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
So again, a quick view of the dam from further down the road. You can see the yellowish trees. That's where the houses would have been.
And you can see that road going, bending, the new road bending round.
Yeah.
Probably picking up where the old road went. But there was just no way to get around the other side.
There were probably about 8 houses in all, both sides of the river. Maybe 3 or 4 on the side my mum and dad were on, and then some the side that we were standing on now. But there weren't many people there.
So back on the road with that feeling, that you'd seen it.
We'd actually seen it, and actually on this road. So we're back on High Forth Road, and I will share a couple of funny stories that are from when my family were there. One of which being when I was in the car as a baby in a carry cot on the back seat, a moose turned up in the middle of the road, and you meet a moose on the road, you stop. You certainly don't pat the horn, because if you do, you're going to challenge. It's a challenge. It will attack you. It will write your car off from standing. The car standing and the moose taking a standing start at a run will write your car off for you. So you just have to sit there and wait for the moose to get bored and move on. So there I was in the carry cot on the back seat, no seat belts. My mum had to do a sudden stop, and I ended up on the floor with the carry cot on top of me. Another story.
And just wait for the moose to move on.
And just wait for the moose to move on. I don't know whether Mum had the courage to get out of the car and sort me out before the moose moved on, or whether she had to wait until the moose had gone before she dared get out. Another one was that my brother he was 13 years older than me. He used to take his bike and his golden Labrador on walks through the trails. One day they encountered a bear with its cub, and my brother knew exactly, you avoid bears, you stay away. Well, the dog didn't, and the dog got between the mother bear and the baby bear and was barking at one of them or the other one. I think it was the baby bear, and the mother bear was very tolerant for quite some time, but eventually had enough, rose up on her hind legs and was going for them. And the dog belatedly realised what a dangerous situation he was in, ran hell for leather home, leaving my brother between the dog and the bear on his bike, pedaling for his life. Literally, yeah. Other livestock stories they encountered were just that the dog would follow his nose down to the road, follow trails, came back with porcupine quills in its nose because it had encountered a porcupine.
Yeah. I mean, one of the disappointments of this trip is we didn't see a moose and we didn't see a bear. We saw some bear poo.
Yeah, which I was very excited about. And the only reason I knew it was bear poo was because it was purple. They were eating berries. Yeah. It was blueberry season. So, so there we go.
So back on High Falls and into Wawa, back into Wawa, the town. This is the hospital in the town. Ali was actually born in the old hospital, and this new one was built on the land behind it. So we couldn't see the actual hospital, but this is the site of the new one. And then they drove us to another part of the town, and this is the church where you were christened.
Yep.
And just a week before, Kyrie, who sort of knows everybody in the town, it's that sort of place, she knew the church secretary who actually got us a photograph of the entry in the baptism register for when Ali was baptized. So that was great. And we just had a look around the town. I referred earlier to the bowling alley. This is it. Don't forget, pizza night, Friday nights. But it's the traditional style.
Well, basically, Mum and Dad described how when they were there, it was a bit like being in the cowboy movies. I think it may still have been wooden sidewalks, but it was certainly raised sidewalks above mud roads, which were mud most of the year. The only time they weren't mud was very briefly in summer when the snow and ice set in. But they talked about all the buildings along this main street having false fronts like in the cowboy movies, and this was actually the cinema when Mum and Dad were there. So you've got the false front on it, and you've got this Nissen hut at the back that was the cinema.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of things haven't changed, really. But this is our guide. That's Kyrene on the right, and her daughter Johanna on the left. I think it was Kyrene, or maybe Johanna, referred to them as history junkies. They just love to help people find out more about the area.
So yeah, so these were the angels who found us our way there, basically.
Yeah.
And we are incredibly thankful that they made it so simple, and they just, when they finished, I mean, we stopped at this spot overlooking Lake Superior, and when they finished, they just drove us back. We said thank you very much, and that was that. It was all very simple for them, and for us, it was everything come together in what, 3 hours?
Yeah. So we're standing by this board with Alexander Young Jackson. He was an artist who was active in the area. Well, part of the time when Ali's family were there, he was actively painting, but he was part of a group of artists called the Group of Seven, which we'll talk about later. But Johanna was quite an expert.
Yeah, she was quite, because Alexander Young Jackson in particular was active in this area, lived in this area for some time, and so she actually runs tours. So yeah, maybe one day we'll get to do that with her.
So we went back to the Rock Island Lodge where we were staying, just to relax. This was one of the beaches around there. But that evening, once we got back, because the surprises weren't over, that evening we then discovered that where we were staying, this Rock Island Lodge, used to belong to the Great Lakes Power Company, who Ali's dad Les worked for. And this, well, we're not entirely sure what they used the lodge for, but it suddenly made sense when the parents used to tell the stories of being on the beach.
Yeah, so they used to talk about going onto the beach, and I presumed it was the beach was right where they were living, but that was a river. There were no beaches, and you've got the dam and the fast flowing water. No, there were no beaches. And it turns out the roads have changed slightly. There's Highway 17 running through now, but I think it was classed as about 4 miles away. They used to, for their relaxation times, they used to go drive 4 miles to Lake Superior, and there were stories of mad all-night parties, nothing to do where they lived, and so there'd be these parties going on with all the people who worked in the community. Dad would go off on his night shift down to the power station, and he would come back from his night shift, and the party was still going, and they would end up on the beach having a picnic breakfast and playing volleyball on the beach, and we were right there. This suddenly was made sense of the pictures that I got in our family photo tin. This was Lake Superior, and this was the stormy weather, blue skies, but stormy waves that we'd arrived with. It all just came together.
Yeah. So, you know, Ali would stand on the beach taking photos. She took most of these photographs, and she would be taking photographs, and we then began to realise she was standing on the beach where her mum, Helen,
my brother, who was an absolute camera addict.
Yeah, and Dad, they would have been on exactly the same beach. And we'd chosen the location to stay randomly. Almost,
just because it was
lodge.
really pretty. It looked nicer than the motels in
Yes.
Wawa.
And it was on the edge of the lake.
Yeah.
And there was this connection as well. So, you know, that was just great. And we'd share the story with the people staying at the lodge, and they all got very excited. So we had another couple of days of wandering around up and down trails, but then it was time to move on. But in a sense, the excitement wasn't over yet. We got the bus back to Sault Ste. Marie, the plane to Montreal via Toronto. And when we got to Montreal, we got the airport bus to the edge of the city, and then we walked a couple of miles, trundling our suitcases along because we were looking for a cafe.
We had hours to spare before we could move into where we were staying.
Yes.
So there was no point getting a taxi. We just wandered and enjoyed the sights.
Yeah.
On the way to this
Cafe, which the guy at the hotel who had stayed at an airport hotel overnight, he recommended this cafe. So we thought, well, yep, let's go there. Could do with a decent coffee. And this is it. Well, this was the entrance to it. It was called the Crew Collective Cafe, and it was in an old bank. And this was the revolving door entrance, and this was the ceiling in the cafe. It was open to the public, but then there was a membership section, and if you joined, you could go into the back and use the workspaces for your research, your study, and so on. And it was
online transactions as well, whatever business dealings you might have, or whatever.
So the sort of place you could just sit,
Write your journal,
bring your diary up to date. Yeah. So beautiful cafe, lovely coffee. But then it was time to move on, and again we still had plenty of time to get to.
Another thing that I wanted to do as part of the pilgrimage, if you like, was to find where, not just Montreal, because that was where we sailed from, but to see if I could find where the ship actually sailed from. Because for me, that was the point where my feet left Canadian soil. And so I'd done some online research to see if I could find out where the ships sail from, because Cunard doesn't sail there anymore. And I found the name of a dock that was where it sailed from. I think it had been renamed since then, but I was sort of like, well, hopefully sometime during our stay in Montreal, we'll find it.
So we're wandering to find our accommodation.
Driving our suitcases behind us.
Down this long street, turned a corner, and there we were.
This is the dock. And it has to be said, I was smiling on that one, but I was a bit shell-shocked because it had happened so easily. There we were, and not only was it the dock, there was a ship in the dock. This, it has to be said, was probably 3 times, I wouldn't fancy being on it, about 3,000 passengers, whereas much bigger. But there we were. There was the dock. There, mission accomplished. Basically, it was odd.
Yeah.
This little tugboat. It's part of the story. My mum was very nostalgic about the tugboats that used to be able to steer these massive ships out of their tiny little docks and into the main shipping stream. And here was a tugboat, and it just was another bit of icing on the cake.
Yeah. And talking of icing and cake.
Yes, the final icing on the cake was actually that I have my mum's recipe book, which is the 5 Roses cookery book. And here is this flour mill. The area was full of grain stores. Around the dock was full of grain stores. Here's this flour mill. They no longer call it 5 Roses Flour because it's a French speaking. It's officially French speaking there. And so it was renamed, and lo and behold, you could see it in the daytime. You were within view of it most of the time, but at night there's this gorgeous neon light flashing. 5 Roses Flour.
So lots of memories coming back. But while we're in Montreal, of course, there was a mini pilgrimage we needed to do. Montreal, the home of Leonard Cohen. I don't know if you're all familiar with Leonard Cohen, but a poet, singer-songwriter who died a couple of years ago. And this mural of Leonard we set out to find, but again we stumbled across it
by accident. We went to a Inuit art museum and turned the corner on the way out, and there was this mural. Again, we had no clear idea exactly where it was, and there it was. Hello, Leonard.
And we visited his favourite bagel shop called Bagel, etc. and queuing for a seat because it was very busy. Ali took this sort of selfie. This is what the inside looked like, and as you paid on the way out, the boss was on the till, and there was a photograph of him. I think probably shaking hands with Leonard Cohen. We didn't realise, of course, the flat it lived in, the apartment it lived in was not far away.
Just over the road.
We did find Marianne Street, so
Yes.
that was nice.
Yeah.
And then back on the dock.
So this is basically an event space that is used when the cruise ships are in dock. And it just struck me, because there'd been cruise ships in, it was closed off to the public, but the ships had gone. And so we were able to go up, and it just looked like a ship's deck. The planking, there's a car park behind me, but in the reflections, it looked like you're walking the gangway onto the ship. So there you go, that's my picture.
Yeah. And so it was time to leave. Well, not on one of these. We saw this going, and it felt very nostalgic.
Yeah.
It reminded you of when your parents did leave.
Yeah, when they left, they knew this time they were leaving for good. And Mum always said that there was a band playing on the dock side, playing "Will Ye No Come Back Again," and I think that was quite an emotional moment.
Yeah. But of course you did come back.
Yeah.
But it was time to go. This is Montreal Airport, and we had to go and get the plane. But of course, one more thing to do once we got home, and that was distribute the souvenirs. So here Toby and Oscar, our grandsons, wearing their Wawa shirts. So they were pleased to see us and pleased to have the gifts.
Yeah.
So that was really sweet. So I think just a reminder of the group of seven. We'll just do that one. I think.
Yeah. Okay. So this is Johanna on the left, the group of seven band. She takes these tours of the area where Alexander Young Jackson worked, and just to say that my mum went on to become an artist when she got back to England, and this group of seven were active in the area that my mum and dad lived in. This was the original seven. These three were added to them, and then we actually have two people. Tom Thompson was one of the original influences of the group. And so there's a trail being established where you can, wherever was a location for one of the paintings, you find these easels set up with the artist's stall, the actual painting and information about the group. So this was just down the road from where we were staying, about half an hour's walk away, and this was Sandy Beach.
On the edge of
Lake Superior. This is a painting that was completed by Jackson in 1954. Which was during the time my mum and dad were there. I've no idea whether mum encountered the artist's work or not, but it was actually the first picture I ever saw my mum do was of woodland on the way to High Falls Road, basically in the autumn. So going back to the Agua Canyon trip we took, there are paintings that were completed there. The artist travelled there. This was a shot from the train we took, and here is Tom Thompson's painting. Here is another one done of the Bridal Veil Falls that is actually done by MacDonald. This is one done by Casson, and it's just to say that although my mum didn't carry on painting scenes from Canada, the environment obviously was a great influence to her, and here we have a woodland pastel, which I think was taken from a trip in the Peak District. And then here's a shot of the ferns in the woodland in the Agua Canyon that I took. And
time check, folks. It's about 11:45, I think.
Yeah, thanks. So here's ferns that my mum painted.
And so just a quick mention about First Nation people. We found these, well, we pointed to a red dress on a trail. This symbolised remembrance for First Nation people, particularly women who were attacked, raped, murdered, and so you'd see red dresses hanging from trees. But we came across Benjamin Chichi, who was a First Nation artist from the Ojibwe tribe, and his drawings, this is wild geese, and he did other drawings, were just amazing. I just absolutely love them, the swallows. Yeah, but sadly he died when he was 33, committed suicide in a prison, which wasn't untypical story for First Nation people. Just as he was getting famous, he was in a prison cell and he committed suicide. Lots of suicides among the First Nation people. So there's a whole story there, but just some beautiful art from him. That's what's written on his tomb. So we'll stop there and just check the chat room. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Martin and Alison. That was really touching. Thank you for sharing that story with us all. It was lovely to hear about your mum being an artist, Ali, and the way obviously she'd been influenced by her time in Canada. It was very special for you, and I hope you can go back.
I do too. I do too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So that was lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you.